If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Continuing, the private jet landed smoothly at London City Airport. Edward Maxwell adjusted his tie and observed the imposing urban landscape of London rising outside the window. The city lights were beginning to flicker on that late afternoon, contrasting with the orange sky of the London sunset. Finally home, he thought, feeling a mixture of relief and anticipation. After 3 weeks of exhausting meetings between Dubai and Singapore, the 45-year-old businessman, owner of one of the country's largest construction groups, had decided to return to the United Kingdom without warning. The thought of surprising his daughter, Sophia, just 6 years old, was the only thing that could bring a genuine smile to his face, marked by the fatigue of international negotiations. The driver, James, was already waiting for him on the tarmac, discreet as ever, with the armoured SUV ready to brave the chaotic traffic of the capital. Edward got into the vehicle and took a deep breath. The past few weeks had been decisive for the future of Maxwell Construction Group. International expansion was finally underway, something his father, Arnold Maxwell, the company's founder, had never managed to achieve. "To Hampstead, James, and don't tell anyone I'm coming back," he instructed the driver, who merely nodded with a discreet smile, already accustomed to his boss's eccentricities. During the journey, Edward mentally reviewed the latest events. Since Vanessa had entered his life, 2 years after the tragic accident that took Camilla, his wife, many things had changed. Vanessa Hayes, former legal director of a multinational, had brought stability to his personal and professional life. Edward's parents adored her, and, at least on the surface, she took good care of Sophia. His phone vibrated. It was Arnold, his father. "Not yet," he murmured to himself, ignoring the call. The disagreements between father and son over the company's direction had intensified in recent months. The old guard, represented by Arnold, still held considerable power on the board of directors, and Edward knew he would have to face another battle to implement his modernization ideas. Traffic flowed better than expected for a Friday. In less than 40 minutes, the vehicle passed through the gates of the Hampstead Mansion, an award-winning architectural project that combined modern lines with expansive gardens inspired by the works of renowned landscape designers. The house, with its 2,000 square meters, was a symbol of the Maxwell family's economic power. "No need to unload the bags, James. I'll do it later." Edward dismissed the driver and walked silently to the entrance. He used his key to prevent the doorbell from announcing his arrival. Inside the house, an unusual silence hung in the air. The heels of his Italian shoes echoed on the marble of the entrance hall, while the golden light of the late afternoon poured through the large windows. "Sophia, Daddy's home," he called, expecting to hear his daughter's hurried footsteps running towards him. As always happened, nothing. He moved through the main living room, observing that everything seemed impeccably tidy, perhaps too impeccable. Sophia's toys, which usually lay scattered in the corners, were nowhere in sight. Photos of Camilla, which Edward had insisted on keeping, had been repositioned, almost hidden among decorative objects. It was then that he heard, coming from the corridor leading to the private area of the house, a female voice laden with irritation. "How many times do I have to repeat myself, Sophia? When I give an order, you obey immediately." Vanessa's voice had a tone Edward had never heard before. His body tensed instantly, and he moved quickly down the corridor following the direction of the voice. "This is getting out of hand. If your father knew about your behavior— But he's never here, is he? Stay there, looking at that wall until you learn to behave like a well-mannered girl." Edward stopped at the entrance to Sophia's playroom. The scene he found froze his blood. His little daughter was standing, facing the wall, with her shoulders hunched and her head bowed. Vanessa, her back to the door, maintained a rigid posture, her arms crossed over her sophisticated dress. "What is going on here?" Edward's voice broke the silence like thunder. Vanessa spun around with a start, her perfect face dissolving in surprise. "Edward, no! We weren't expecting you today," she stammered, quickly trying to recompose her authoritative expression into a welcoming smile. Sophia remained motionless, as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Sophia, come here," Edward called, his voice now softer. The girl turned slowly. Her eyes, so much like Camilla's, were red and swollen. Upon seeing her father, a mixture of relief and fear crossed her face. She ran to him, hugging his legs tightly. "I'm just teaching her boundaries, darling," Vanessa explained, approaching to kiss her husband. "Sophia broke that Chinese vase your mother loved so much. I was just—" "Don't lie to me," Edward cut in, pulling away from the kiss. "I spent enough time in the corridor to hear what you were saying." Vanessa paled but quickly regained her composure. "You don't understand how difficult it is to raise a child alone while you travel all the time. Your daughter needs discipline, Edward. Your parents agree with me." Edward knelt down, bringing himself to Sophia's height. "Princess, can you go to your room for a little while? Daddy needs to talk to Aunt Vanessa." Sophia nodded, still clinging to her father's trousers. "I didn't break any vase, Daddy," she whispered. "I swear." "I believe you," Edward replied, kissing her forehead. "Go on, we'll talk later." As the girl walked away, Edward stared at Vanessa. Now he could see something that had perhaps always been there, but that his constant absence had prevented him from seeing, a calculating coldness behind that perfect smile. "Never speak to my daughter that way again," he said, controlling the volume of his voice. "And never again punish her by making her face the wall. That is humiliating." Vanessa laughed, a short, dry sound. "You show up after 3 weeks and think you can judge my parenting methods? Please, Edward, you don't even know your own daughter's routine." The words hit Edward like a punch. There was truth in them, and it bothered him deeply. But something more serious was happening. He could feel it. "That doesn't justify what I saw. And what did you mean by, 'if your father knew'? What are you hiding from me, Vanessa?" The woman averted, her gaze visibly uncomfortable. "Nothing. It was just a figure of speech." "We'll continue this conversation tomorrow," Edward decided. "Now I'm going to spend some time with my daughter." As he walked towards Sophia's room, a growing unease settled within him. There was something wrong in that house, something beyond the episode he had just witnessed. His daughter's frightened eyes, the abnormal silence of the mansion, the hidden photographs of Camilla. Everything indicated that during his absences, the Maxwell home transformed into a completely different environment. Entering Sophia's room, he found her sitting on the bed, hugging the teddy bear. Camilla had given her before the accident. For the first time, Edward realized that he might have failed his daughter in a way that no business success could compensate for. Chapter 2. Secrets Within Walls. "Daddy, she'll be angry if you stay here with me." Sophia's voice was almost a whisper. Edward sat on the edge of the bed, his heart aching to see his daughter so apprehensive in her own home. "Don't worry about that, Princess. This is our home. I'm your father, and I can stay with you as long as I want." Sophia hugged her teddy. "Bear tighter. But when you leave, things are different." Edward ran his hand through the girl's brown hair, so much like Camilla's. The resemblance between mother and daughter always struck him powerfully, especially in the small gestures. The way Sophia furrowed her brow when she was concentrating, or how she bit her lower lip when she was nervous, everything reminded him of Camilla. "Different how, Sophia? You can tell me everything. Daddy's here now." The girl hesitated, looking at the door as if fearing someone was listening. "Aunt Vanessa says if I don't behave, you'll never come home again," she confessed finally. "She says you'll be ashamed of me and prefer to stay away." Edward felt a wave of anger surge through his body. How could Vanessa say something so cruel to a 6-year-old child? "Sophia, look at me." He held her little face between his hands. "That's not true. It will never be true. No matter what happens, I will always come back for you. Always. Do you understand that?" The girl nodded, but her eyes still showed doubt. "Grandpa and Grandma also say I need to be more obedient with Aunt Vanessa, or I'll end up like—" "Mommy!" The words hit Edward like lightning. What had his parents been telling Sophia about Camilla? "Like Mummy how?" "They don't say much. They just say Mummy was disobedient and that caused the accident." Edward took a deep breath, trying to contain his indignation. Camilla had never been disobedient. On the contrary, she had been one of the few people brave enough to confront the Maxwell family when necessary. And the accident? Well, The accident had always been a nebulous subject that Edward had avoided investigating deeply, preferring to accept the official version. A mechanical problem with the car. Camilla was driving. Your mother was a wonderful woman, Sophia, brave, intelligent, and full of love. The accident was exactly that. An accident. And no one, ever, should make you think differently. Sophia seemed to relax a little at her father's words. I have a secret, she said suddenly, lowering her voice even further. But you can't tell anyone. Edward leaned closer, intrigued. Of course I won't tell. What's the secret? The girl opened the belly of her teddy bear, where there was a small hidden pocket. From there she pulled out an old mobile phone. Mrs. Eleanor gave it to me. It's her old phone. I use it to write letters to you and Mummy, even though I know Mummy can't read them. Edward took the device, moved. It was a basic, old-model smartphone, but it worked. On the screen, he saw dozens of unsent text messages. All began with Dear Daddy or Dear Mummy. His heart ached at the thought of his daughter writing messages that never received a reply. Why did you never send me these messages, Sophia? Aunt Vanessa said you're too busy to read silly notes, and that it would be better if... I didn't bother you with such things. Edward hugged his daughter tightly, fighting back the tears that threatened to fall. Never believe that again, never. I always want to read your messages, no matter where I am. At that moment, Edward made a decision that would change the course of their lives. He would spend the entire week in London, cancelling all international commitments. He needed to understand what was really happening in his home when he was absent. The next morning, the atmosphere at breakfast was tense. Vanessa maintained an artificial smile as she served Edward coffee. Sophia, more animated by her father's presence, ate her cereal in silence, casting suspicious glances at her stepmother. I called my parents, Vanessa announced casually. They're eager to host us for Sunday lunch, as always. Edward put down his coffee cup. We won't be going this time. I have other plans for Sophia and me. Vanessa's smile wavered for an instant. Your parents also confirmed their presence, Edward. You know how your mother gets when we change plans at the last minute. My parents will understand. I need to spend time with my daughter. Vanessa shot a cold glance at Sophia, who immediately lowered her eyes to her plate. As you wish, I'll call to cancel. When she left the dining room, Edward approached Sophia. Does this happen often? Do you have lunch with Vanessa's parents every Sunday? Sophia nodded. And then we go to Grandpa Arnold and Grandma Regina's house. I play alone while they talk about the company. Edward frowned. He himself rarely visited Vanessa's parents. How had she established this routine without his knowledge? After breakfast, Edward decided to work from home. He settled into the office but left the door open to observe the dynamics of the house. He soon realized that Vanessa seemed annoyed by his unexpected presence, making several low-voiced calls in the master bedroom. Around 10 in the morning, the doorbell rang. Edward heard James, the driver, announcing the arrival of Mr. and Mrs. Maxwell. His parents had shown up unannounced. Arnold Maxwell, at 72, still maintained the imposing posture that had characterized him throughout his business life. Regina, his wife, always elegant with her pearl necklaces and designer clothes, walked 2 steps behind her husband, as she had for the past 50 years of marriage. Son, what a surprise to find you home on a Monday, Arnold exclaimed with that grave voice Edward associated with tense board meetings. Vanessa called us, worried. She said you're acting unusually. Edward glanced at Vanessa, who remained discreetly in the background, with an expression of false concern. I'm perfectly fine, Father. I just decided to spend more time with Sophia. Regina approached, kissing her son on both cheeks. Darling, we all know how devoted you are to the girl, but we also have commitments with international investors. Vanessa told us about your exaggerated reaction yesterday. Exaggerated? Edward couldn't hide his irritation. I found my daughter being punished in a humiliating way. How did you expect me to react? Arnold made a dismissive gesture with his hand. Discipline is fundamental, Edward. Your mother and I were always strict with you, and look where you are. Sophia needs to understand that there are consequences for inappropriate behavior. Sophia is 6 years old, father. Old enough to start understanding how the world works, Regina interjected. Especially our world, Edward. The girl carries the Maxwell name. Edward observed his parents with new eyes. He had always known they were rigid, but he had never realized how much that rigidity bordered on cruelty, especially when directed at a child who had lost her mother so early. "Where is Sophia?" he asked, noticing his daughter's absence. "Mrs. Eleanor took her to the garden," Vanessa replied promptly. "I thought it best for her not to participate in this conversation." Edward walked to the window and saw Sophia sitting on the swing talking to Mrs. Eleanor, the housekeeper who had worked for the family for over 20 years. The elderly woman seemed to be the only person in that house who showed genuine affection for the girl. "What have you been telling Sophia about Camilla?" he asked abruptly, turning to face his parents. There was a brief moment of tension. Regina and Arnold exchanged glances. "Only what was necessary," Arnold finally replied. "That her mother had an accident. I don't see why we should go into details with a child. Sophia told me you said Camilla was disobedient, and that caused the accident. Is that what you consider necessary?" Regina paled slightly, while Arnold maintained an impassive expression. "We didn't put it that way, Edward," Regina defended herself. "We just explained that actions have consequences. Camilla insisted on driving alone that night against our advice, and—" "Enough!" Edward raised his voice, something rare in his always controlled demeanor. "Camilla was an adult woman, not a disobedient child, and the accident was caused by a mechanical failure, not by some imaginary disobedience of my wife." The silence that followed was charged with tension. Vanessa approached, trying to diffuse the situation. "Edward, your parents only want what's best for Sophia. We all do. Perhaps we're all a bit stressed with your sudden return and—" "Stressed?" Edward interrupted her. "Why would my presence in my own home be a cause for stress, unless there's something happening here that you don't want me to know?" Arnold stood up, adjusting his impeccable suit. "I think this conversation is not leading anywhere. Edward, when you calm down, we'll talk again. Regina, let's go." As his parents headed for the exit, Edward noticed something strange in his mother's behavior. Regina seemed to want to say something more, but a stern look from Arnold silenced her. "I need to go to the office to resolve some outstanding issues," Vanessa announced, picking up her bag. "I'll be back for dinner," Edward nodded, watching her leave. When he finally found himself alone, he walked to the garden. Sophia was still chatting animatedly with Mrs. Eleanor, and for the first time in a long time, he saw a genuine smile on his daughter's face. "Mrs. Eleanor," he called, approaching the two, "can I speak with you privately?" The housekeeper, an elderly woman with grey hair and a kind face, nodded. "Of course, Mr. Edward. Sophia, why don't you go get that storybook to show your father later?" When the girl walked away, Edward went straight to the point. "How has Sophia been treated when I'm traveling?" The housekeeper's eyes filled with concern. "Mr. Edward, I've worked for this family for over 20 years. I've watched you grow up, marry, seen Mrs. Camilla leave." "Mrs. Eleanor, please, I need to know the truth." The housekeeper looked around, making sure they were alone. "It's not good, Mr. Edward. Not good at all. Mrs. Vanessa, she changes completely when you're not here. She's very harsh with the girl. And your parents, they support her in everything. Little Sophia lives in fear." Edward felt a knot in his throat. "Why did you never tell me?" "I tried once," the housekeeper replied with downcast eyes, "but Mrs. Vanessa intercepted my call. After that, I was threatened with losing my job if I tried again. Without this job, how could I help my grandchildren in Wales?" Edward covered his face with his hands, feeling betrayed and guilty at the same time. "Thank you for your honesty, Mrs. Eleanor. Things will change around here, I promise." That night, as he put Sophia to bed, Edward made a silent promise to himself and to Camilla's memory. He would uncover the full truth about what was happening in his family and protect his daughter no matter the cost. Chapter 3. Fragments of the Past. The week passed in a climate of apparent normality, but Edward noticed subtle changes in the behavior of Vanessa and his parents, who began to call daily, always with some pretext related to the company. On Thursday evening, While Vanessa was attending a charity dinner organized by her high society friends in London, Edward decided to investigate his wife's office, located in one of the wings of the mansion. "Is Sophia already asleep, Mrs. Eleanor?" he asked, finding the housekeeper in the corridor. "Yes, sir. The little one fell asleep right after her bath. It seems playing all day with her." "Father exhausted her." The lady smiled, something rare in those tense days. "It's good to see the girl happy again. Thank you for taking such good care of her. You can go rest. I'll keep an eye out in case she wakes up." When the housekeeper left, Edward walked to Vanessa's office. The door was locked as he expected, but he had a copy of the key. After all, it was his house. Upon entering, he switched on only the desk lamp, avoiding turning on the main lights that could be seen from the garden. Vanessa's office was impeccably organized, reflecting her methodical personality. Files perfectly labeled, legal books aligned by height on the shelves, not a single paper out of place. Edward began to systematically examine the desk drawers, finding only documents related to her work at the construction group and in charity projects. It was when he opened the personal file that something caught his attention. Among folders of expenses and investments, there was one labeled simply CM, Camilla Maxwell's initials. With trembling hands, Edward opened the folder and found documents related to Camilla's accident. The police report, expert reports, newspaper clippings, and, surprisingly, a letter from a private investigator. The letter was dated 3 months after the accident and addressed to Arnold Maxwell, not Vanessa. How had it ended up in her hands? Edward read the content with growing unease. "As requested, I conducted a thorough investigation into the accident involving Mrs. Camilla Maxwell. I confirm that the vehicle experienced brake system failure, but our analyses indicate that this failure may not have been accidental. There is evidence of tampering. I strongly recommend keeping this information in absolute secrecy, considering the implications for the company's reputation, especially due to the vehicle's connection with Maxwell Construction, Group's transport subsidiary." Edward felt his blood run cold. The letter clearly suggested that Camilla's accident could have been provoked, and worse, that his own father had hired an investigator only to then conceal the findings. Why did Vanessa have these documents? And why had no one ever mentioned that the car involved in the accident had a connection to one of the family's businesses? Continuing his search, Edward found a USB drive hidden in a false bottom of the drawer. He connected it to Vanessa's computer and discovered a series of emails exchanged between her and Arnold, dated even before Camilla's death. The familiarity and intimate tone of the messages suggested a relationship that went beyond professional, long before Vanessa was officially introduced to Edward as a newly hired lawyer after the tragedy. In one of the emails, Arnold wrote, "Camilla keeps insisting on investigating the accounts of the Edinburgh subsidiary. If she discovers the inconsistencies in the River Spey project in the Scottish Highlands, everything will be compromised. Edward trusts her blindly, and that's a problem." Vanessa's reply was equally disturbing. "Stay calm. I'm already arranging access to the documents she requests, but with the necessary adaptations. As for the other matter we discussed, I await your guidance." Edward felt sick. What did all this mean? Camilla had worked in the construction group's legal department before marrying him and continued to act as an independent consultant afterward, especially on socio-environmental projects. She had always been extremely ethical and had mentioned weeks before the accident that she had found some worrying irregularities in a project in the Scottish Highlands. Edward hadn't given it much thought at the time, trusting that his father would never get involved in anything illicit. Continuing to examine the emails, Edward found messages exchanged shortly after the accident. Vanessa wrote to Arnold, "Camilla's doctor called me. She wasn't alone in the car as we thought. She survived but is in critical condition. What do we do?" Arnold's reply was short. "Take control of the situation. Use your contacts. No one can know." Edward's hands trembled so much he almost dropped the mouse. Camilla had survived the accident? That was impossible. He had seen the body, attended the wake, suffered the grief. Or had he not? Suddenly, hazy memories returned. He had never actually seen Camilla's body. The coffin had remained closed during the wake due to the conditions of the accident. His father had insisted it was better that way, to preserve the image everyone had of Camilla. Edward quickly copied all files from the USB drive to his own phone and put everything back exactly as he had found it. Before leaving the office, he noticed one last detail: a small golden key kept in a velvet case, hidden behind books on the shelf. He didn't recognize the object, but something compelled him to photograph it before leaving. Back in his own office, Edward spent hours examining the files. The more he read, the more horrified he became. Apparently, Camilla had discovered evidence of corruption in a large construction project in the Scottish Highlands. Embezzlement of public funds, bribery of environmental inspectors, and serious violations of indigenous community rights. When she confronted Arnold, she had been subtly threatened. The accident had occurred a few days later. Even more disturbing were the indications that Camilla had not only survived, but had been declared mentally unstable after the accident and institutionalized. Vanessa, who at the time was still just a lawyer for the construction group, had assumed the role of intermediary, ensuring Camilla remained isolated. Edward was about to close his computer when he received an email from an unknown sender. Upon opening it, he found only one sentence: "Look for St. Lucy's Clinic in Cornwall. She needs you." No signature, no further details. How did someone know what he was investigating? Edward looked around, paranoid, feeling watched in his own home. Cornwall was a few hours from London, on the coast. Could it be that Camilla was alive, kept in some isolated clinic all these years? The sound of the front door opening interrupted his thoughts. Vanessa had returned. Quickly, Edward closed all files and assumed a casual posture, pretending to work on company documents. "Still awake, darling?" Vanessa entered the office, stunning in her evening gown. "The dinner was wonderful. We raised double what was expected for the children's hospital." "That's good," Edward replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm just finishing up some contracts." Vanessa approached, placing her hands on his shoulders. "You've worked too much this week. Why don't you leave this for tomorrow and come rest?" Vanessa's touch, once comforting, now felt icy to Edward. How could he have trusted that woman? How could he have left his daughter in her care? "I'll finish this quickly, you go ahead." When Vanessa left, Edward called his longtime friend and trusted lawyer, Luke Taylor. Despite the late hour, Luke answered promptly. "Edward, has something happened?" "Luke, I need your urgent help, but I can't talk on the phone. Can we meet tomorrow at the office?" "Of course. I'll be there at 7 a.m. and we can talk before anyone else shows up." The next morning, Edward left before Vanessa woke up, leaving a note saying he had an important meeting. Upon arriving at his office at the construction group's headquarters, he found Luke already waiting for him. Luke Taylor, a middle-aged man with shrewd eyes behind thick-rimmed glasses, was more than a lawyer to Edward. He was one of the few true friends he had in the corporate world. He had worked with Camilla and admired her deeply. "By your tone on the phone, it must be serious," Luke commented, as Edward carefully closed the office door. Edward took a deep breath and shared everything he had discovered the previous night. As he spoke, he saw Luke's face change from surprise to indignation and finally to horror. "My God, Edward, you're telling me there's a possibility Camilla is alive? That's unbelievable. I know it sounds crazy, but the evidence is there. I need to go to Cornwall to check on this clinic, but I can't just show up. If my father and Vanessa are really involved in this, they have eyes everywhere." Luke adjusted his glasses, thoughtful. "I have a contact in Cornwall, a retired National Crime Agency investigator. He can do a discreet check on the clinic." "We don't have time for that, Luke. If Camilla really is there, every day counts." "I understand. In that case, I suggest the following. I'll prepare official documents requesting an inspection of the clinic as part of a broader investigation into mental health institutions in the county. That will give us legal access to the site." Edward nodded, grateful for his friend's support. "What about Sophia? I can't leave her with Vanessa after what I've discovered, but I also can't take her into a potentially dangerous situation. My sister Martha has a farmhouse in the Cotswolds, an hour from London. It's a safe and isolated place. Sophia could stay there with her while we investigate this." "Perfect. I'll pick Sophia up. From school today and tell Vanessa we're spending the weekend away, just the two of us. Then I'll meet you and we'll head to Cornwall. Edward, Luke hesitated, you need to be prepared for any scenario. If Camilla really is alive, after all these years of isolation, she may not be the same person you knew. Edward felt a knot in his throat. I know. But if there's the slightest possibility that she's alive and needs help, I have to do this. For her and for Sophia. Upon returning home to pack a bag for the supposed weekend with his daughter, Edward found Mrs. Eleanor waiting for him at the kitchen entrance with a worried expression. Mr. Edward, I need to show you something. The housekeeper led him to the utility room, where they couldn't be overheard, and took an old, yellowed photograph from her apron pocket. A friend of mine works in the house of a family in Cornwall. She sent me this a few years ago, but I was afraid to show it. After our conversation in the garden, I can't keep this to myself anymore. Edward took the photograph with trembling hands. It showed a woman in profile looking out at the sea through a grate. Even from the side, even with shorter hair and a thinner face, there was no doubt it was Camilla. On the back of the photo, a single handwritten sentence, "She's alive." Chapter 4. The Road to Cornwall. The plan was put into action with precision. Edward picked Sophia up from school early that Friday, explaining to the coordinator that they would have a special father-daughter weekend. The girl, radiant with the news, hugged him tightly as she got into the car. "Where are we going, Daddy?" "It's a surprise, Princess. But I can tell you it's a very beautiful place, with lots of trees and a lake for swimming." Sophia's little eyes sparkled. "Is Aunt Vanessa coming with us?" "No. This time, it'll just be you and me." The relief on his daughter's face was evident, which broke Edward's heart even more. How had he allowed his own daughter to live in fear in her home? Instead of returning to the Hampstead mansion, Edward drove directly to a shopping centre, where he bought new clothes and some toys for Sophia, as well as essential travel items. Then he called Vanessa. "Edward? Where are you?" "The school called saying you picked Sophia up early." "I decided to take Sophia away for a weekend. Just the two of us." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "And you didn't think it important to consult me first? I have plans for the three of us on Sunday." "It's only 2 days, Vanessa. Sophia's excited. We'll be back Sunday evening." "Where are you staying?" Edward was prepared for the question. "At a friend's ranch near Oxford. We'll be back on Sunday." Another pause. "Well, in that case, have fun, but call your parents. They were expecting to see us for Sunday lunch." "Will do." Edward hung up, knowing Vanessa would certainly call Arnold immediately. They needed to act fast. He met Luke at a petrol station on the M40 motorway. The lawyer was already waiting in his own car, a discreet and comfortable sedan. "All set," Luke informed him. "My sister Martha is waiting for Sophia in the Cotswolds, and I have the documents for the clinic inspection." Edward knelt down to speak with Sophia, who was observing everything with curiosity. "Princess, there's been a change of plans. You're going to spend the weekend with Aunt Martha, Uncle Luke's sister. She has a beautiful farmhouse with lots of animals and even a lake for swimming. I need to resolve a very important matter, and I'll pick you up on Sunday. Is that okay?" Sophia looked at Luke and then at her father, hesitant. "Do you promise to come back for me? You won't leave me there?" The innocent question revealed the girl's deep fears. Edward hugged her tightly. "I will always come back for you, Sophia. Always. It's a promise I'll never break." With a heavy heart, Edward transferred Sophia's bag to Martha's car, who had just arrived. The woman, with a kind smile very much like her brother's, warmly introduced herself to the girl. "Hello, Sophia. I'm so happy to meet you. Did you know I have a calf that was born this week? We're thinking of a name for him. Can you help me?" Sophia's little face lit up at the idea, and Edward felt a little more at ease seeing her leave with Martha. Luke placed a hand on his shoulder. "She'll be safe, Edward. Martha is a primary school teacher and loves children. Now we have to focus on getting to Cornwall before anyone realizes where we've really gone." They took the A303 towards the coast, with Luke driving while Edward examined the documents prepared by the lawyer. The plan was simple. Present themselves as representatives of a mental health institution inspection committee, authorized to inspect the facilities and interview patients. "I managed to get some more information about St. Lucy's Clinic," Luke commented, as they cut through the winding roads of Exmoor National Park. "It's a private institution, very isolated, located on a small island accessible only by boat 30 minutes off the coast of Cornwall. Officially, it specializes in long-term treatments for patients with severe psychiatric disorders. And unofficially, there are rumors about patients who enter and are never seen again. Wealthy families paying fortunes to keep inconvenient relatives out of the spotlight. The medical director, Dr. Paul Rivers, has powerful connections in London." Edward felt a shiver. "And how do my father and Vanessa connect to this place?" "I don't have that information yet, but I discovered that the clinic receives substantial donations from a foundation linked to Maxwell Construction Group. The transfers are made through various intermediary companies, but the money, ultimately, comes from your family's coffers." Edward closed his eyes, trying to process all the implications. If Camilla was indeed alive and kept in that clinic, it meant that his own family had orchestrated an elaborate plan to remove her while making him believe she was dead. But why? What had Camilla discovered that posed such a danger? The 4-hour journey seemed endless. As they approached Cornwall, the urban landscape gave way to the lush Atlantic forest, and glimpses of the rugged coast appeared between the trees. Under normal circumstances, it would be a pleasant trip, but Edward could barely register the beauty around him, consumed by anxiety and the hope of finding Camilla. They arrived in Cornwall in the early evening. The historic town, with its charming cobbled centre and colonial houses, was lit up for the tourists strolling peacefully. Luke parked near the guest house where they had reserved rooms. "We should go to the clinic tomorrow morning," he suggested. "Showing up at night would raise suspicions." Edward reluctantly agreed, recognizing his friend's logic. After leaving their bags in the rooms, they went out for dinner at a discreet restaurant in the modern part of the town. Edward barely touched his food. "What if it's all a trap?" he questioned, lowering his voice. "What if someone is manipulating us?" Luke considered the question seriously. "There's always that possibility. But the photo Mrs. Eleanor showed you seems authentic, and the documents you found too. There are too many pieces fitting together for it to be just coincidence or manipulation." Edward ran a hand over his face, exhausted. "If Camilla really is alive, how will I explain to Sophia? How do I tell a 6-year-old child that the mother she believes to be dead is actually alive, held prisoner by her own family? One step at a time, Edward. First, we need to confirm if Camilla is actually at the clinic, then we'll think about the rest." Back at the guest house, Edward tried to sleep but tossed and turned, tormented by thoughts and theories. Around 2 in the morning, his phone vibrated. It was a message from an unknown number. "You are being followed. Be careful who you trust." Edward showed the message to Luke the next morning during breakfast. "Someone knows we're here," the lawyer commented, worried. "We need to be even more cautious." As they walked to the small port from which they would depart for the island, Edward had the constant feeling of being watched. At one point, he noticed a man in a cap following their movements from across the street. When he mentioned this to Luke, the lawyer nodded discreetly. "I saw 2 others, probably private security. Your father must have been alerted." Arriving at the port, Luke presented the documents to the person responsible for the boats that made the crossing to the island, where the clinic was located. The man examined the papers with suspicion. "Inspection? No one informed me about this." "It's a surprise inspection," Luke explained firmly, "precisely to avoid preparations that could mask irregularities." Reluctantly, the man agreed to take them to the island in his small motorboat. During the crossing, Edward observed the stunning landscape of the Cornwall Bay, with its clear waters and dozens of islands covered by dense vegetation. Under other circumstances, it would be a paradisiacal ride. St. Lucy's Island appeared on the horizon, an elevation covered with vegetation, with a large white building on top surrounded by high walls. From afar, it could look like an exclusive resort, were it not for the absence of any tourist signage and the obvious security around the perimeter. Upon disembarking at the island's small pier, they were immediately approached by 2 athletic security guards dressed in white uniforms that resembled nurses. "Can I help you?" one of them asked, clearly suspicious. Luke stepped forward, presenting the documents and explaining the purpose of the visit. After a thorough examination, the guards made a radio call, and a few minutes later, a middle-aged man, wearing a medical coat, came down to the pier to receive them. Dr. Paul Rivers, he introduced himself with a professional smile that didn't reach his eyes. Director of St. Lucy's Clinic, I confess I'm surprised by this unexpected inspection. Standard procedure, Luke replied coldly. We'd like to see the facilities and speak with some patients if possible. The doctor hesitated briefly, but soon regained his composure. Certainly. Follow me, please. As they climbed the paved trail leading to the clinic, Edward felt his heart beating faster and faster. Could Camilla really be there, just a few meters away? What would it be like to reunite with her after all these years? And more importantly, would she recognize him? The clinic itself was an impressive structure, a 3-story main building in colonial style, surrounded by small constructions that, according to Dr. Paul, housed long-term patients. The gardens were impeccably maintained, creating an atmosphere of tranquility that contrasted with the tension Edward felt. Our facilities are considered among the best in the country, the doctor explained as he guided them through the main building. We treat patients with various conditions, from anxiety disorders to more severe conditions requiring constant monitoring. Edward observed everything carefully, looking for any sign of irregularity or, more importantly, any indication of Camilla. The therapy rooms, consulting rooms, and common areas seemed adequate and well-maintained. Nothing indicated mistreatment or suspicious conditions, which made everything even more confusing. "And the long-term patients?" Edward asked, trying to keep his voice neutral. "Can we see them too?" Dr. Paul adjusted his glasses, visibly uncomfortable. "Some of our long-term patients are in delicate conditions. Their families pay for privacy and personalized treatments." "I understand," Luke interjected, "but our inspection includes all patients. The documents are clear on that." After a moment of tension, the doctor yielded. "Very well, I'll take you to the East Wing where the long-term patients are, but I ask for discretion. Some haven't received visitors in a long time and may be disturbed by the presence of strangers." As they walked through a corridor connecting the main building to the East Wing, Edward noticed a woman in uniform carrying a tray of medications. Something in her gaze, a mixture of recognition and alarm, made him instinctively know she knew who he was and why he was there. The East Wing was very different from the rest of the clinic. The windows had discreet bars, the doors were reinforced, and the general feeling was one of isolation, not treatment. Dr. Paul opened some doors, showing rooms occupied by patients who, for the most part, seemed sedated or oblivious to their presence. "As you can see, everyone has comfortable accommodations and receives constant care," the doctor explained, with growing nervousness as they advanced down the corridor. Edward examined each face, each silhouette, with his heart pounding, until, as they passed a semi-open door at the end of the corridor, he saw her. With her back to the entrance, looking out the barred window, was a woman with short brown hair and a fragile body, dressed in a simple light blue tunic. Even without seeing her face, Edward knew immediately. The way she slightly tilted her head, the posture of her shoulders, these were gestures he knew intimately, gestures that had remained vivid in his memory all those years. "Camilla," he whispered, almost inaudible. The woman turned slowly, as if that simple word had cut through the fog that enveloped her. Her eyes, once vibrant and full of life, now seemed dull, marked by years of isolation. But when they met Edward's, something in them lit up, a spark of recognition that transcended time and distance. "Edward." Her voice was just a whisper, as if it hadn't been used in a long time. "Is it really you?" Dr. Paul tried to intervene. "This patient is not authorized to receive visitors. I ask that—" "Get out of my way," Edward interrupted, with an authority that surprised even himself. "Or I swear I will turn this clinic into ruins before nightfall." The doctor recoiled, realizing that the situation had completely spiraled out of his control. Edward entered the room, approaching Camilla slowly, as if fearing she might disappear at any moment. "Camilla," he said again, his voice now choked with emotion. "I came to get you." to take you home." She raised a trembling hand, touching his face delicately, as if she needed to confirm that he wasn't a hallucination. "They said you knew, that you agreed to keep me here." Edward felt his stomach churn at the revelation. "Never. I thought they made me believe you had died in the accident." Camilla's eyes filled with tears. "Sophia, our daughter." "She's fine, growing up beautiful and strong, like you." A fragile smile lit up Camilla's face, the first in many years. "I knew you would come eventually. I never lost hope." Chapter 30: The Escape. The world seemed to have stopped for Edward and Camilla in that small room at St. Lucy's Clinic. Years of separation, lies and pain, condensed into a single moment of reunion. Luke observed the scene from the doorway, keeping a watchful eye on Dr. Paul Rivers, who seemed to be debating whether to intervene or flee. The lawyer discreetly pulled out his phone and began photographing the room, documenting the conditions in which Camilla was being held. "We need to get out of here," Edward whispered, holding Camilla's hands. "Can you walk?" She nodded, still absorbing the shock of the reunion. "They limit my movements, but I'm physically fine, just weak." Edward turned to Luke. "We're taking her right now." Dr. Paul finally found his voice. "This is impossible. Mrs. Maxwell is under intensive psychiatric treatment. Her mental condition is extremely fragile. Removing her without proper preparation could cause irreversible damage." "The only thing causing damage here is illegal confinement," Luke retorted, advancing menacingly towards the doctor. "We have enough evidence to demolish your career and this clinic along with it." The doctor paled but maintained his posture. "You don't understand. There are powerful people involved. It's not as simple as it seems." "Then explain," Edward demanded, without letting go of Camilla's hand. "Why is my wife, whom everyone believes to be dead, confined in this place for years? Who gave that order? And why?" Dr. Paul looked nervously down the corridor, making sure they were alone. "It was your father, Mr. Maxwell. Arnold Maxwell approached me personally after the accident. Your wife had survived, but was severely injured. He offered me a significant sum to keep her here and officially declare that she had not survived her injuries." Edward felt anger swell within him. "And you accepted? You violated all ethical principles of medicine for money?" "It wasn't just money," the doctor defended himself, now visibly disturbed. "Your father has influence over the medical board, over regulatory bodies. He didn't give me a choice." "There's always a choice," Camilla interjected, her voice gaining strength. "I begged to see my husband, my daughter. You sedated me whenever I tried to escape or when I refused to take the medication." The doctor lowered his eyes, unable to face the accusation. "In the beginning, yes. Then you stopped fighting. I thought you had accepted your situation." "I never accepted," Camilla replied, with a firmness that surprised everyone. "I just learned that to survive, I needed to appear docile. Meanwhile, I mentally recorded everything, every name, every abuse, every lie. I knew that one day someone would discover the truth." Edward felt immense pride in his wife. Even in the worst circumstances, Camilla had maintained her inner strength. That was exactly why he had fallen in love with her resilience, her unwavering integrity. "Dr. Rivers," Luke said, taking on his lawyer's role, "you have two options now. You can help us get out of here, with Mrs. Maxwell, subsequently cooperating with the authorities, or you can try to stop us and face charges of kidnapping, falsification of a death certificate, and unethical medical practice. The choice is yours." The doctor seemed cornered. After a few moments of reflection, he sighed deeply. "The security guards are everywhere, and there are cameras in all main corridors. You won't be able to just walk out the front door." "Is there another exit?" Edward asked. "There's a small pier on the west side of the island, used for supply deliveries. It doesn't have as much surveillance. If you can get there, you can use one of the smaller boats." Camilla squeezed Edward's hand. "He's right, I've observed that pier from my window. Sometimes patients who are discharged leave that way to avoid contact with new arrivals." Edward looked at Luke, who nodded. "We'll do it. Dr. Rivers, you'll accompany us to the pier. If we try to leave alone, the security guards will certainly intercept us. The doctor hesitated, but finally agreed. I'll help you get there. But after that, you're on your own, and if they ask, I'll say I was coerced. Fair enough, Luke agreed. Camilla needed help to stand up. Years of confinement and medication had weakened her body, once strong and full of energy. Edward offered support, feeling how thin she was under the simple tunic. Wait, she said before they left. I need to get something. Camilla went to a small dresser beside the bed and removed a loose board at the back. From inside, she took out a worn notebook with dozens of pages filled with her elegant handwriting. I recorded everything here, names, dates, conversations I overheard, evidence that my confinement was orchestrated by the Maxwell family and executed with the complicity of this clinic. Luke took the notebook, impressed. This is pure gold for the case we're going to build. The group left the room cautiously. Dr. Paul led the way, explaining to the few staff they encountered that they were taking the patient for a special examination on the mainland. The doctor's natural authority prevented questions, but Edward noticed the suspicious glances. They followed a less monitored side corridor, then went down a service staircase. Edward supported Camilla, who struggled to keep pace. Upon reaching a back door, the doctor checked if the outside area was clear. The pier is 200 meters from here down that trail, he indicated. There are always 1 or 2 boats docked. The keys are kept in a box next to the pier, code 5529. You're not coming with us? Edward asked, still suspicious. My presence would only slow you down. Besides, I need to ensure no one notices the escape too soon. Edward nodded. Thank you for your help, Doctor, but know that this does not exempt you from responsibility for what you did. I know, the doctor replied, with a resigned look. I lost the right to consider myself a good doctor, a long time ago. Perhaps helping you now is the first step to redeeming something of what I've done. The group discreetly exited through the back door and followed the indicated trail. The path was steep and slippery, making Camilla's progress even more difficult. She was breathing heavily after years of little exercise. We're almost there, Edward encouraged, supporting his wife. You're being incredibly strong, Camilla. She smiled weakly. Thinking about you too, about you and Sophia, kept me alive all these years. Upon reaching the small pier, they found 2 motorboats docked. Luke quickly located the box with the keys and typed in the code provided by the doctor. It worked, he exclaimed, pulling out a bunch of keys. Now we need to figure out which one. A sound of footsteps on the trail alerted them. Edward turned, tense, expecting to see clinic security. But to his surprise, it was Vanessa who was hurrying down the slope, accompanied by 2 men in suits whom he recognized as part of Maxwell Construction Group's security team. Did you really think it would be that easy? Vanessa seemed furious but maintained her usual elegant composure. We received an alert as soon as you arrived in Cornwall. Your father is on his way, Edward. He will be very disappointed. Edward protectively placed himself in front of Camilla. How could you do this, Vanessa? How could you participate in such a cruel charade? And on top of that, mistreat my daughter. Vanessa laughed, a cold sound that echoed across the silent pier. You really don't understand anything, do you? It was never about you or your precious family. It was about business, power, control. Your wife discovered irregularities that could destroy the Maxwell empire. We needed to neutralize her. You knew all. Along, Camilla murmured, staring at Vanessa with contempt. It was you who orchestrated everything. The accident, my disappearance. I merely executed a brilliant plan, Vanessa replied with an arrogant smile. And I was very well rewarded for it. Your father offered me a position in the company, access to the family's inner circle, and eventually, you, Edward. I can't say it was a bad deal. Edward felt his blood boil. Sophia is just an innocent child. How could you treat her that way? Vanessa shrugged. The girl is as stubborn as her mother. She needs to learn to obey. Luke, who had been discreetly testing the keys on the boats, finally managed to start one of them. Edward, we have to go now. The security guards advanced immediately, but Edward was prepared. Years of practicing jiu-jitsu, a hobby he maintained to relieve business stress, finally proved useful. With precise movements, he managed to take down one of the men, while Luke hit the other with an oar found on the pier. "Run, Camilla!" Edward shouted. Camilla managed to board the boat with Luke's help, while Edward struggled to hold off the guards. Vanessa, realizing she was losing control of the situation, pulled a small revolver from her purse. "This ends now," she declared, pointing the weapon at the boat. Edward felt time slow down. With a desperate lunge, he threw himself at Vanessa, deflecting the gun barrel upwards at the exact moment she fired. The shot echoed across the bay, startling some birds that took flight from nearby trees. Taking advantage of the confusion, Edward managed to grab the gun from Vanessa's hands and ran to the boat, which Luke was already pulling away from the pier. "You won't get away," Vanessa shouted as the guards recovered. "This island is surrounded by cameras. The police have already been called." Luke accelerated the boat to its maximum, rapidly moving away from the island. Edward hugged Camilla, protecting her from the strong wind as they cut through the waters of Cornwall Bay. "Where are we going?" Camilla asked, still trembling from the intensity of the events. "I have a friend with a house in St. Ives, a nearby beach," Luke replied, maneuvering the boat between the islands. "We can hide there while we decide the next step." Edward checked his phone. There were several missed calls from his father, as well as messages from Vanessa asking where he was. One message in particular caught his attention, sent from an unknown number. "Cornwall police are on our side. Federal authority on the way to help you. Wait at the main pier in St. Ives. 30 minutes. "Who is helping us?" Camilla asked, reading the message over Edward's shoulder. "I don't know," he replied, intrigued, "but we have few options now." Luke nodded, adjusting the route. "Let's go to St. Ives, then. I have a contact in the National Crime Agency. Maybe it's him." As they moved away from St. Lucy's Island, Edward observed Camilla, who seemed to absorb every detail of the landscape, as if rediscovering the world after years of confinement. Her eyes, once dull, now shone with a mixture of hope and determination. "I'm so sorry for everything you went through," Edward murmured, holding her cold hands. "I should have investigated more, questioned the official version." Camilla squeezed his hands back. "Don't blame yourself. They were extremely careful, eliminating any clue that could raise suspicion. The important thing is that you came, you found me. And now we're going to find Sophia," Edward promised. "We're going to rebuild our family." The boat trip to St. Ives lasted about 20 minutes. The small fishing village, famous for its picturesque beaches, seemed peaceful on that sunny afternoon. Some tourists walked along the shore, completely oblivious to the drama unfolding. Upon docking at the small pier, they were greeted by a middle-aged man, wearing ordinary clothes, but with a posture that betrayed his police training. "Mr. Maxwell, I'm Detective Inspector Oliver, National Crime Agency. I received a call from Mr. Taylor informing me about the situation. Come with me quickly, people are already looking for you in the area." Edward hesitated, still suspicious, after everything they had been through. "How do we know we can trust you?" The inspector handed over his badge for inspection. "I've known Mr. Taylor for years. We worked together on a corruption case on the Bristol coast. Besides," he added, looking at Camilla, "I have a personal interest in dismantling clinics like St. Lucy's. My own sister was a victim of a similar scheme." After checking the badge and exchanging a glance with Luke, who confirmed knowing the inspector, Edward agreed to follow him. They were led to a discreet official car parked on a side street. "We have a helicopter waiting 15 minutes from here," the inspector explained as he drove quickly out of the village. "It will take you directly to London, where a trusted team is prepared to take your statement and ensure your safety." "What about Sophia?" Edward asked, worried. "My daughter is at a farmhouse in the Cotswolds. We've already sent agents to pick her up. She'll be waiting for you in London." Camilla, sitting in the back seat next to Edward, squeezed her husband's hand. "I can barely believe I'm going to see her again. Will she recognize me?" "I'm sure she will," Edward replied, emotional. "You're in every feature of hers, Camilla, and I always talked about you, keeping your memory alive." The inspector led them to an open field where a helicopter awaited with its rotors already in motion. As they boarded, Edward finally felt safe. In a few hours, they would be reunited with Sophia, beginning the process of rebuilding what had been destroyed years ago. However, as the helicopter took off, Edward couldn't help but think of his father and the role he had played in the entire plot. How could Arnold have orchestrated something so cruel against his own daughter-in-law, keeping his son ignorant for years? What was in the documents Camilla had discovered that justified such desperation? The answers would come soon, but at that moment, watching Camilla asleep on his shoulder, exhausted by the intensity of the events, Edward knew that the priority was to protect his reunited family. Justice would come in its own time. Chapter 6. The House of Light. The helicopter landed at the Metropolitan Police Air Support Unit helipad in London as the sun was setting on the horizon. Edward helped Camilla disembark, still concerned about her physical state after years of confinement. Despite her fragility, she showed surprising inner strength, as if each step away from that island restored part of her essence. They were greeted by a medical team and more federal agents, who led them to a private room inside the building. Detective Inspector Oliver explained that they would need to take formal statements, but first, they would ensure Camilla received proper medical attention. "When will I see my daughter?" Camilla asked, as a doctor checked her vital signs. "She's on her way," the inspector assured them. "Our agents picked her up from the farmhouse in the Cotswolds about an hour ago." Edward held Camilla's hand, both nervous about the imminent reunion. Sophia didn't even remember her mother. She was only 2 years old when the supposed accident occurred. How would they explain something so complex to a 6-year-old child? While they waited, Edward was called for a private conversation with Detective Inspector Oliver in an adjacent room. "Mr. Maxwell, the situation is more serious than we imagined," the inspector informed him, showing photographs of documents on his tablet. "We found these files during an authorized search at Maxwell Construction Group's head office this afternoon." Edward examined the images, recognizing financial spreadsheets, contracts, and internal memos. The more he read, the more his stomach churned. The documents revealed a complex corruption scheme involving the construction group's Scottish Highlands subsidiary, exactly as Camilla had suspected. There was evidence of bribes to environmental inspectors, fraudulent contracts, and worse, evidence that the company had illegally dumped toxic waste in protected areas. "Your father is wanted for questioning, but he apparently left the country this afternoon," the inspector continued. "Your mother is at home, under discreet surveillance. As for Ms. Vanessa Hayes, she was detained in Cornwall an hour ago, trying to leave the region in a private jet." Edward closed his eyes, trying to process the complete collapse of the family and business structure he had known all his life. As painful as it was, part of him felt relief at finally knowing the truth. "What about the clinic?" he asked. "Dr. Rivers?" "He is cooperating with the investigation. The clinic has been sealed off, and all patients are being evaluated by an independent medical team. We have already identified at least 3 other cases similar to your wife's, people declared dead, who were being held there against their will." The conversation was interrupted by a soft knock on the door. An agent entered, accompanied by Sophia, who looked around with curiosity and apprehension. "Daddy!" the girl exclaimed, running to hug Edward. "Aunt Martha said you had to solve a very important problem, and that I had to come meet you here. Is everything okay?" Edward hugged his daughter tightly, feeling tears well up. How to explain to a child that her mother, whom she believed to be dead, was actually alive? "Sophia, I have something very important to tell you," he began, kneeling to meet her eyes. "It's something that might seem confusing at first, but I promise it's true. Do you remember when we talked about Mummy, how I said she was the bravest and kindest woman I ever knew?" The girl nodded, holding her inseparable teddy bear. "You said she went to heaven after the accident." "That's what they made me believe, darling, but I found out that your mother is alive, and she's here, waiting to meet you." Sophia's eyes widened, a mixture of confusion and hope. "Mummy is alive, really?" "Yes, Princess. Bad people kept her away from us for a long time, but now we've found her, and no one will separate us again." Sophia was silent for a moment, processing the information in the way a 6-year-old child can process something so complex. "Can I see her?" she asked finally, her voice small. Edward nodded, taking his daughter by the hand and guiding her to the room where Camilla waited. As they opened the door, they found her sitting in an armchair, having already received initial medical care. Her face was clean, her hair combed, and she wore borrowed clothes that replaced the clinic tunic. Camilla held her breath upon seeing her daughter. Her eyes, already red from crying, filled with tears again. Sophia stopped at the door, examining the woman carefully. "Sophia," Edward said softly, "this is your mother." The girl took a hesitant step, then another. Camilla remained still, giving her daughter space to process that moment at her own pace. Then Sophia did something unexpected. She opened the belly of the teddy bear and pulled out a small folded photograph. It was an image of Camilla, much younger, holding baby Sophia. "I always talk to you at night," the girl said, showing the photo. "Daddy gave me this photo when I was little. I hid it in Teddy because Aunt Vanessa didn't like it when I talked about you." Camilla covered her mouth with her hands, trying to suppress the sob that threatened to escape. "I also talk to you every night, my love, looking at the stars and wishing you could hear me somehow." Sophia moved closer, studying Camilla's face intently. "Your eyes are like mine. Daddy always said that." "Yes?" Camilla managed to reply, slowly extending her hand. "We have the same eyes." Sophia looked at her father as if seeking confirmation, and Edward nodded, encouragingly. The girl then took the final step and, with the naturalness that only children possess, simply hugged Camilla. "I knew you'd come back one day," she whispered. "I told Teddy every night." Camilla enveloped her daughter in her arms, unable to hold back her tears any longer. Edward joined the embrace, and for a moment, there in that impersonal room of a government building, they were just a family reunited after a separation too painful. The following days were a whirlwind: formal statements, medical examinations for Camilla, conversations with lawyers and prosecutors. The press soon caught fragments of the story, and headlines about the Maxwell scandal began to appear in all newspapers and news broadcasts. Maxwell Construction, exposes corruption scheme and rescues wife held in private imprisonment. Businesswoman presumed dead found alive in clandestine clinic. Maxwell patriarch fugitive after corruption and kidnapping accusations. Edward kept the family isolated from this media storm, temporarily settling in a rented flat under police protection. Camilla needed peace and quiet to recover her physical and emotional health, and Sophia needed time to adapt to the new reality. A week after the rescue, they received news that Arnold Maxwell had suffered a heart attack while attempting to board a flight to the United Arab Emirates. He was hospitalized in custody in serious condition. Regina Maxwell was under house arrest, cooperating with investigations in exchange for a reduced sentence. "I should feel anger, hatred," Edward commented as he talked with Camilla on the flat's balcony, watching the sunset. "But I can only feel pity for them. They sacrificed their own family for money and power." Camilla rested her head on his shoulder. With each passing day she seemed stronger, more like the determined woman Edward had known years ago. "What happened to the construction group?" she asked. "It's under judicial intervention. The Scottish Highlands subsidiary has been closed and contracts are being reviewed. Probably not much will be left when it's all over." "And does that bother you? Losing the family empire?" Edward reflected for a moment. "Surprisingly, no. I realize now that I was never truly happy there. I was just following the path my father laid out, without questioning." "What will we do now?" Camilla asked, intertwining her fingers with his. "I've been thinking about that," Edward replied. "I have a substantial personal reserve, separate from the company's assets. We could start over somewhere else, away from London and the painful memories." In the next room, Sophia slept peacefully, adapting with surprising ease to her mother's presence. Children, in their natural resilience, sometimes accepted miracles more easily than adults. 3 months later, the Maxwell family settled into a modest beachfront house in the quiet town of Lyme Regis on the Dorset coast. The house, built on a plot surrounded by preserved nature, had large windows that allowed sunlight to flood every room. Edward, using his experience in the construction sector, founded a small consultancy specializing in sustainable projects. Camilla, after a period of recovery, began working with human rights organizations, using her own experience to help victims of institutional abuse. Sophia, enrolled in a local school, flourished away from the pressure and fear that had marked her life in the Hampstead mansion. She developed a special talent for painting, creating colorful works that expressed her emotional journey. A year after the rescue, on a Sunday afternoon, the family celebrated Sophia's 7th birthday with a small party in the garden. Only close friends had been invited, including Luke, who now coordinated the New Beginnings Foundation, created by Edward to help families separated by unjust circumstances reunite. "Daddy, Mummy!" Sophia called, running to them with a painted canvas in her hands. "I finished my special painting. It's a gift for both of you." Edward and Camilla looked at the work with emotion. Sophia had painted a house by the sea, very similar to the one they now inhabited. In the main window, 3 figures holding hands looked out at a starry sky. Below, written in the still irregular handwriting of a 7-year-old, was the title, "The House of Light." "It's beautiful, my love," Camilla said, hugging her daughter. "Why did you choose that name?" Sophia smiled with the simple wisdom of children. "Because our house is always full of light now. Not just sunlight, but that special light that comes from inside people when they are happy and together." Edward felt his eyes well up. Of all the constructions he had supervised in his career, none was as important as this. A home built not with concrete and steel, but with love, truth, and forgiveness. That night, after Sophia fell asleep, Edward and Camilla sat on the veranda, watching the sea under the moonlight. The past still cast occasional shadows, nightmares for Camilla, moments of guilt for Edward, but with each passing day those shadows diminished a little more. "Sometimes I wonder if we'll ever completely leave all this behind," Camilla commented, watching the waves break on the deserted beach. "Perhaps not completely," Edward replied, holding her hand. "But we can choose how those memories affect us. We can use them to build something better, not just for ourselves, but for others." The New Beginnings Foundation grew rapidly, expanding its scope to include legal and psychological support for families separated by abuses of power. The former St. Lucy's Clinic, now under new management and strict supervision, had been transformed into a legitimate rehabilitation center, with a special focus on therapies for traumatized children. The previous month, the family had returned to the island for the reopening ceremony. Sophia, overcoming her own fear, cut the ribbon for the new center, applauded by authorities and former patients who now received appropriate treatment. Dr. Paul Rivers, who had collaborated extensively with the investigations, was serving an alternative sentence, providing medical services in underprivileged communities. Vanessa Hayes was convicted of multiple crimes and would face years in prison. Arnold Maxwell, still hospitalized after complications from his heart attack, would likely spend his final years under house arrest. Regina Maxwell, in exchange for her cooperation, received a reduced sentence and currently lived reclusively in a small flat in London. The Maxwell family's story had shocked the country, exposing a network of corruption that extended across multiple sectors. Investigations were still ongoing, revealing connections with high-ranking politicians and businessmen. For Edward, Camilla, and Sophia, however, these were just distant news now. Their priority was the present, every moment together, every small shared joy, every new learning. "I think Sophia is right about the House of Light," Edward commented, observing the stars beginning to dot the night sky. "That's what we built here, a place where truth can shine freely, even after the darkest days." Camilla rested her head on his shoulder, her body now stronger after months of proper recovery. And light always finds a way, no matter how dense the darkness. That night, as the couple finally retired, Edward stopped in Sophia's room for the nightly ritual of checking if she was well covered. The girl slept serenely, hugging her old teddy bear, now accompanied by new furry friends. On the wall above her bed, the painting "The House of Light" glowed softly under the bedside lamp. Edward smiled, thinking about how a 7-year-old child had managed to capture in a simple painting the deepest essence of what it meant to rebuild after the storm. To find light where before there was only darkness, and transform it into a beacon to guide not only oneself but also others who still wandered lost. Outside, the sea continued its eternal cycle of waves, and inside the House of Light, a family slept in peace, finally reunited, finally free to write their own story. Dear listeners, we hope that the journey of Edward, Camilla, and Sophia has touched your hearts and shown that even in the darkest moments, the light of truth and love can transform lives. To continue being moved by stories like this, we have a special playlist with other inspiring narratives. Find it by clicking here. If this story brightened your day, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your like. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the paths of forgiveness, redemption, and family reconstruction. Tell us in the comments what moment moved you the most in this saga of the Maxwell family. Your light makes all the difference for us to continue telling inspiring stories.